you guys doing? I am pouring some beer right now. I got me some Golden Pilsner Yingling. So some average
Wow.
beer, but not an average glass. I got my little. There you go. Take a look. Declaration of
Oh,
Independence.
check that out.
Pretty excited about all that. But I am your host, Wes Seiler, for Conservatism on Tap. Thrilled to be joined by John and his handle of Knob Creek. That looks delicious right there. And then Cal Davenport from In the Trenches podcast. Welcome back, Cal. It's good to see you, buddy.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah, man, I love this show. I love a chance to be able to hang out with you guys and see you and talk conservatism and appreciate what all you bring to the table. Cal, Josh Lewis, doing all the work that you do with your podcast and having incredible guests on and in-depth discussions. And then John, we're always having those kind of talks during the week. I love catching up with you about that. And
Definitely.
yeah, I think we've got a lot to talk about tonight. As we get into our toast and roast section, always fun to be able to get into this, is we get a chance to be able to kind of give some folks some props who are doing good work like that. So I always love doing that with you guys. But I think there's a couple folks that I want to recognize tonight. So we got a lot of people to toast, right? So, and I think this is going to segue nicely into our topic. But the first person we got to talk about is one of our contributors on our other show, Christopher Souza, because it's a big life day for him. As he just announced today that he is becoming a father. We put him through all kinds of stuff as the lone liberal on our shows. He always is we put him through like a Second Amendment quiz, and he's always having to deal with me and Kyle and Megan, talking about things from a conservative or libertarian standpoint. And he holds his own every single episode. He holds his own, has a very, very open mind and very cordial guy, and I love hanging out with him. And it's so cool to see this happening in his life. I don't know if his cat agrees with it, as you can see right there, but he's excited that his
Yeah.
wife are going to be welcoming a little girl here in November. So I'm really excited for them. That's awesome.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah. So,
Very, very
Coach
cool.
Chris, man, if you get a chance to watch this, we love you, man, and we're happy that that's coming your way. It'll rock.
Yeah, I do remember when Ellie was born. I mean, like you said, was in the last episode. Before child, after diapers. It's so true. But like your life just changes in that moment when you hold your child the
I
first
had
time.
a friend of mine who was like, he's got a little kid who's just turning one, I think, and he was like, "Hey man, my wife told me that like it's just gonna be like this as long as we have kids. That I just need to like strap in. It's never gonna get easier. Is that true? Is that true?" And I was like, I saw like I could have crushed him right there in that moment. Yes, it is. Like you're never gonna get sleep again. And I was just like, no, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
What
What my friend my friend was gonna have a kid. He's like, "What's it like having a kid?" And I said, "Well, tell me about how you met your wife." And he went through the whole story, and it took him like an hour. We just talked about it, and I was like, "Cool." So then this whole hour, you talked to me about how you met her, you dated her, you decided that it was time to spend the rest of your life with her. You kind of agonized over that. You had your bachelor party, you prepped, and then you married her, and then she was yours and you were hers, right? Imagine all of that happening like that. That's what it's like having a kid.
Well, the other thing
Like
is
right in that moment, the kid comes out and you're like, "Oh man,
you
I
spend
met
so
you,
much
dated you,
time.
committed, we're done already."
Yeah, you spend so much time like changing diapers and like feeding them and doing everything for the kid. When they finally start to do things for themselves, it's like, oh yeah, like that's right. Like there's a telos that I was aiming for. Yeah, like there's actually a goal in this. Like, and I remember when my kids could actually like dress themselves. When my daughter Samantha could get to the point where she could actually match clothes and put on her shirt and pants that like together. I was like, that's a huge part of my day that used to suck. That now is
Right.
I don't even have to worry about. Like that's amazing. And it just in some ways it gets easier, but I'm also told it gets much harder. I don't know this because I haven't gone through it, but people talk about kids graduating from high school and like them going out into the world and in college and trying to find a job and navigate all that, and you're watching them go through all these like life challenges, and there's only so much you can do at that point because they're not in your house anymore. So yeah, I still have a
What
lot
I
of
hear is first, year and a half though of their life, you're telling them to get up and walk, and for the next like 16 or 17 years, you're telling them to shut up and sit down.
Yeah.
I'm definitely in that latter half with all three of them.
Kyle, don't let us talk you out of it though. Like I'm
Yeah,
sure coming in your life soon. So, all right. So anyway, celebrating Chris, and that's gonna be fun to welcome him to the next stage of his life. And then somebody else that I really want to toast, because normally we do a toast, then we do a roast, and we go after somebody. We definitely are going to be going after a few folks tonight, but I got to celebrate this guy. So he is our governor in Florida. And what you got to know about the state of Florida is that the election a few years ago between DeSantis and a guy named Gillum, who was the Florida Democrat, was like razor thin close. Like our state could have been controlled by Democrats, and what a difference it would have been because Andrew Gillum, like, he wasn't exactly a centrist, and like, there's more and more that's come out about him since that kind of like tells you who he really was. And everyone I talk to around Florida is just like, man, we dodged a bullet because with DeSantis, I mean, he just has skyrocketing approval ratings. People are talking about him potentially running for president or as Trump's like VP nominee if Trump runs against Mike Pence. We'll see, but regardless, he is
Mhm.
enormously popular, and he's in the news yet again. Not this time, not so much for COVID stuff, which he's kind of been famous for. Um, but for critical race theory. And just so you know, this is a huge controversy in our state, and I know nationwide it is. I actually
Mhm.
know people who have been escorted out of school board meetings, right, for bringing up critical race theory and saying, "Hey, what's going on?" And then school boards not really been able to handle the question or silencing dissent. There's an enormous amount of anger and frustration about this, and it's at the point where if anybody sees anything that mentions diversity or inclusion, they immediately go to CRT, right? And so, what DeSantis and the Florida Department of Education have ruled is that critical race theory cannot be taught to kids in the state. And so here's his justification to Fox News that he gave. He said, I don't want our curriculum to be politicized. It's not about smuggling in your political agenda. It's about teaching Floridians, Florida's youth, the foundational principles of our country." And you see other
Mhm.
members of his administration. I'll give you a couple um, things that they have written down or mandated. And one of the rules that they've put in place says instruction on the required topics must be factual and objective. It may not suppress or distort significant historical events, such as the Holocaust, and may not define American history as something other than the creation of a new nation based largely on universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. So, cheers to that. And
Right.
then another statement here that says no child should be classified as a victim or oppressor based on their race or ethnicity. This was his press secretary. So there's a lot going on there, and that's kind of our topic for tonight. Because for me, and I want to get your thoughts on this, guys, because I know y'all are from different states. But for me, I want to roast CRT. I want to roast the concept of people as victims and or people as oppressors simply based upon this color of their skin. But what say you guys? I mean, do you agree with this? Do what are you seeing in your states? Start with Cal on that one, and how do you respond to the strong stance that you see here from Republicans like DeSantis?
Well, so in our state, we have a Democratic governor. So we're not, even if the Republican-controlled Senate and House legislature that we have in Michigan were to pass anything, it wouldn't get through. I do know of people who have gone to school board meetings uh, to dispute this and to push back. And I've heard sort of conflicting things about what the details of these things are, and so I'm not sure exactly what I think about um, what different states have done, because I think it kind of varies state by state a little bit on what they're trying to do here. I can see sort of the political side to all of this playing out, and I think it's a brilliant move on DeSantis's part as he looks ahead to 2024. I want to say, like, I I think that I can list several different concerns that I have with critical race theory. I wouldn't personally, I don't want to focus on my own thoughts about it though, because I mean we're three white guys here having a conversation about critical race theory.
Sure.
But I think that like I think it's really important to highlight what some different Black American intellectuals have said about this, who are probably less interested in critical race theory than white liberals are. And I think of the linguist John McWhorter talking about white fragility, Robin DiAngelo's book, who is a proponent of anti-racism, working with companies towards an anti-racist agenda, and talking about how this sort of thinking does things like take Jackie Robinson's achievement as the first Black Major League Baseball player, and turns it into, well, he's the first person that white people let play, and it takes away that achievement and that empowerment that he brought. And I think that, and I hear the same thing from people like Chloe Baldery, who has come up with her own version of anti-racist training for companies that she calls theory of empowerment. And she pushes back again, saying, like, if you take away things like, if you simply classify Black Americans as oppressed people and people who are disempowered, then you miss all of this history that they contributed to the United States in building their own churches, their own companies, their own financial institutions. And then you miss the fact that those institutions contributed to the civil rights movement. And then it becomes, well, then again, white people allowed civil rights. And it historically disempowers and and basically oppresses Black Americans instead of empowering them as it's supposed to do. And so I think that these are some very important central criticisms coming again from people who are not even considered conservative, and they're Black intellectuals who are concerned with race and seeing some major problems at the core of this theory. And so that's why I have a very strong hesitation, and really like to see kind of pushing back on this and being very careful about how these ideas are introduced and how they're taught.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, John?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, Cal. One thing I just wanted to push on that I think we need to do justice to proponents of critical race theory, and why there are people who are advocating for this kind of agenda in the curriculum. And from what I gather, I mean, I'm in Virginia, right? And there's a lot of untold stories that need to be told. Then they're more on the darker side of Virginia's history. You know, Virginia has Jamestown, and much of where America was getting founded, right, earlier on. And it's just a hard history to stomach. One example is, in Prince George County, you had, like, during a period of desegregation, you had a lot of white administrators who would rather close their schools down, and they rather than desegregate. And so you had a whole generation of middle class white folks, Blacks, not get the education that they deserved. And those voices haven't really come out until just this last semester, when our university decided to focus on them. And I think it's those kind of things that I think critical race theory wants to show. They want to feature these stories. But I agree with you, Cal, that the central character of all those stories is racism. And that's where I get hung up in, is critical race theory a zero-sum game, where we can start highlighting and de-romanticizing some of these feel-good stories that we've had about America's history, but at the cost, and which may be true, but at the cost that people, and especially our children, are going to walk away with all this guilt and this further, this hatred that's festering within them of this us and them kind of category. Am I the oppressor? Am I the oppressed? Just because of the color of my skin. And that's what defines me, which I don't think that they're ready to hear, that they don't think that they deserve to hear. And that's I haven't seen the curriculum. And so that's where my limitation is at. So I hear people wanting to tell stories that need to be told, but I get concerned that it's not going back towards reaffirming America's founding. It's not going back towards reaffirming the rule of law that we've had. It's certainly not going back to affirming Christian tradition, all three of which I've seen re-emphasized over and over again during the civil rights movement, especially when blacks were talking to whites. They were telling them about they were telling the whites their own story, their own history, and that turns out to be the history of all of us.
Well, yeah,
I
that's
just
so
don't
much of
see that.
critical race theory, though, is the difference there. You look at Martin Luther King, who was a believer in the rule of law. I mean, his
Exactly.
whole Birmingham jail went even further than that and talked about natural law, which is like historically a Judeo-Christian and even conservative concept. And not to say MLK was a conservative necessarily, but there was this belief in, those divine principles that we were trying to live up to. Critical race theory, by and large, abandons that and says, "Well, rule of law is just a that's a white people term, right?" Like that's much like rationality and logic. Those are just things that again are subjected to the all-encompassing paradigm of race. That's what people are reacting to, John. So
Yeah, no,
Right.
I totally, and that's what I mean is that what I see in the civil rights movement, I don't see in critical race theory. That's the problem, is that it's, all those things, those good things that we should affirm are not there in critical race
what were you
theory.
gonna say, Cal?
If anything, what
Well,
you have is division, the us and them aspect of it, and those are the things that I can't get behind.
Sure.
Wes, what you were saying that Martin Luther King wasn't necessarily conservative, and I think what you're sort of getting at is that even at that time, and maybe still today for the most part, we left, right, center, libertarians, whatever, we sort of have these foundational beliefs
Mm.
in America. We interpret them differently, but we kind of hold to these sort of core values. And the trouble with critical race theory is that it's based on critical theory. It's based on this on the Marxist
Yeah.
root idea of criticizing institutions as basically hypocritical, as basically a bunch of nonsense, again, as empowering people in powerful places, saying that there's nothing to the ideas themselves. And I think, John, you're absolutely right that we need to highlight these stories. It's very important to do so. And I think some great historians have just started to do this. But the difference is, and I think you'll agree with me on this, is it's one thing to say America's principles are great and we've never really lived up to them and we need to continue to know how we haven't and how we can do better. And versus saying that all of those principles are a bunch of nonsense and it's just about power. That's a
Precisely.
totally
Right.
different way of looking at things.
Well, the other yes. So I think that's fantastic, and you kind of summed up our points nicely there in saying that. The other thing is that, and this is a different critique that you might not hear from many conservatives, but it's probably my strongest, is that I think that critical race theory also does not properly understand or respect diversity. and and what I mean by that is there are some people I know who are black, and that matters deeply to them because they can trace their lineage back, and so their race is tied to their ethnicity, and they can tell you, hey, our family came over from, whatever, DRC, or they came from Libya, and they tell you their entire history, right? There are other people I know who are black, and it doesn't really make a difference to them, honestly. Like, they could be white, and it really wouldn't change their personality. Half their friends are white, and they're just American. They just don't think about it. I mean, you think of like someone like Candace Owens, who she really doesn't talk about her race in any kind of significant terminology. She just says, "Hey, we're people are people," right? And that's diversity. I mean, that's diversity within a group. Is for some people, and the same thing with white people, right? Is there some people who are white, and that's their race, but they're also, they're very tied to their Irish history or whatever, right? Like they can tell you how their family came from Dublin or whatever, right? And then the other people who are white and they're like, yeah, I don't know, I'm a mutt, whatever, right? I think my family is like from France and Germany, but I don't know, right? Like it doesn't matter. Their ethnicity doesn't matter to them, and the race is just how they look as a result, right? And so allowing that diversity and saying, maybe race is critical to you and your identity, but for this guy, it doesn't matter at all, and that's okay. Like allow him to have the mindset that he or she chooses with regards to their race. And so even from a diversity affirming standpoint, they're actually smashing it by saying that it has to hold true in all cases or be the
Right.
summum
I,
bonum,
I used to,
of how we look at life.
yeah, I used to work in the study abroad office. Just interning, counseling students to go abroad. And for a lot of students who, had a different ethnicity, a minority, ethnicity, one of my challenges to them was that, hey, if you're going to this country, odds are you're probably going to be seen as an American before you're seen as African American, or you might be seen as American before they treat you as your Asian American, right? So you might be defining yourself as Asian first and foremost, or African American first and foremost, but all they're going to see is American. How would you feel about that? And you had some students who were like, totally fine. I love being American. And you had other students who were like, had a problem with that, because they define themselves first by their ethnicity before their nationality.
Right.
And so I think you're absolutely right, Wes. I mean, people are very, very different in their diversity. And so restricting it only to one viewpoint is exactly what critical race theory does.
Right. Well, and I guess that's an important lesson for conservatives too, because we can fall into that as well. So we have to say, hey, people have to. You need to respect the Constitution. You need to respect the Declaration of Independence. And anybody who who thinks differently is wrong. Well, to an extent, I agree with that because I support those ideals and those documents and what they stood for. But forcing people, and shouting them down doesn't actually educate them on why those things are beautiful and what they meant, right? And sometimes as conservatives, we tend to just assume our own argument, right? Like, as opposed to explaining to our children, hey, let me tell you about this incredible time in the history of the world when these people got together and they fought for a republic and self-government, and
Mhm.
that's our history as a country. And I guess that kind of gets into this notion of what do you teach kids, if you don't teach them this, then at what, and I've got, we were just talking about Chris, becoming a father. I've got kids who are 5 and 3. At what time then would I expose them to the ideals of American democracy, or Kyle, as you were talking about the rule of law and its its lineage and importance in our daily lives?
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know when I'm going to have that conversation with them. I assume it's before the sex talk, but I like I don't. What's the Constitution talk? Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I hear you. I mean,
Sleep with whoever you
and
want.
that's a
Make sure
hard
the
question. I
lawyer's
mean,
Republican. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know.
I think that kids, first they have to have a good, view of like, of course, a society. I think they need to be in the classroom. They need to be able to be around kids their own age and like understand what a community looks like. Of course, what the family looks like. I think everything just begins in the home, right? And how you govern in the home.
Yeah.
And I think that if I give my kids choices. I give my kids freedoms and things like that. But I think that what's important is just knowing that what they have is a gift. As soon as I can, trying not to have them take what they have for granted. I mean, today was the anniversary of my daughter's like diagnosis for type 1 diabetes, and it wasn't like, hooray, you're type 1 diabetic. It wasn't anything like that, and it wasn't depressing either. It wasn't like, oh, well, you're type 1 diabetic still, there's still no cure. It wasn't anything like that. It was that, hey, listen, this was a hard day for you. It will be hard going forward, and I want you to know that, like, look around because we're all here and we
Yeah.
support you, we love you, and I just don't want you, like, this was a time where we didn't know if you were going to be okay, and you know what, you're okay,
Yeah.
and you're going to be okay, and we're all here for you to make sure of that, like, and that's always going to be. And maybe it's something small like that gratitude, that not taking things for granted, that starts with the kid. I think that's part of it, because ultimately they're inheriting this nation that was given to them and all of its dark stories and the good and the successful stories. I think it starts there. I don't want to ramble,
Well, see,
but
Kyle's already got
that's
it
part
figured
of it.
out because he's just gonna like turn on his podcast, for his whenever, like for his kids, like he'll just have that playing at night, and then like give him a
There you
you
go. At some point it'll soak in.
like, oh, Strauss was a douche. Like, oh, I got it figured out, Dad. Like Edmund Burke all the way. Like,
I don't think we'll have enough hour. We won't have enough hours. We're going to have to throw in some conservatism on tap
There we
in there
go.
too. So,
I think you need to do
I
an
think
ABC for kids. A is for abolition, B is for Battle of Yorktown, C is for Constitution. There you go.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can do something like that for kids.
Did we lose Kyle? I think he might have locked up there. Um, but yeah, no, I think that's yeah. With the whole topic, John, you're right. Is breaking it down into a level that kids can actually understand, and appreciate and enjoy. I think that's absolutely important here. We'll see if we get him back here in a minute.
Oh, did he cut out?
Yeah, he cut out on us. That's all right.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
I don't know. I mean, we talk about milestones, Wes, and I think that's important to me because, I mean, sure, I don't think you need to trust education, even if critical race theory, ends up just falling away by the wayside. Like, I don't think that we have to depend totally on school systems and things in our education systems for those milestones. I don't think that's what we experienced in our lifetime.
Mhm.
But I think it is important to have those milestones that for like you joke, but like the sex talk, like the coming of age, like what is the coming of age
Thank
for
you.
people like us? Like
Yeah.
what does that look like? And I think it's different for some families have traditions to help accomplish that. Some don't. Some have to make it up on the fly. And yeah, I think those milestones are absolutely necessary to be able to lead a life that not only doesn't take it for granted, but also has identity defining moments. Where it's not some theory that's defining who you are, right? It's the life that you've lived, it's the family that you've had, and it's taking the good moments with the bad and helping to make sense of that with already grounded principles that are there. And I think that racism alone and oppression isn't enough to carry on all that weight. you know
Yeah. I mean, I would tell you the thing that helped me most is like sure I can read like Martin Luther King or I could read. I mean, heck, I can read all these books in conservatism that I have on my shelf right here. But what helped me even more was actually getting out into the world and meeting people and going to different countries and seeing those things. And that's when I turned to the great books to help me make sense of what I was seeing. But if it's
Mm.
purely an academic knowledge with no experience with people, then it's missing something. It's missing the way that we actually as human beings absorb, information. As we do it, we have some relational level. It's just part of who we are. And I mean, that's where I get to that point where I realize that, hey, not all Muslims are the same. Some of them read the book of, they read the Quran and they want to go to a mosque and they want to pray, a bunch of times a day, and that's what they want to do. Others read that or they hear about it and then they want to go kill people, right? And you see that with our own religion, is some Christians, they read the Bible and they think this, and others read it and they think something completely different. And it's the same with race. It's some people, it's different, and that's okay. And when you talk to them, you kind of understand. Oh, okay. You can ask questions and understand. Hey, this is why it matters so much to you. It's a huge source of your identity, whether others don't. And that, I guess, that's my challenge is so much of this critical race theory stuff is an academic exercise, and I'm very skeptical of things that are purely academic in nature trying to tell us how we should think. And maybe that's slightly the non-intellectual conservative or the non-intellectual aspect of conservatism, but I think it's important. I mean, I think it's important to be able to have that life experience and to be able to challenge some of these concepts because uh, reality can't always be boiled down into a nice little theory, whether it's critical race theory or otherwise. There's more going on. And Burke, one of the reasons I love him so much is that he made room for that. He made room for the
Mm.
mysterious, the unexpected. He was against abstract theories being applied, to politics without any sense of prudence or respect of location and all this because there's more going on.
Yeah.
So the same
I
thing here.
mean,
I think the Burkean argument applies very strongly to critical race theory.
yeah, agreed. I
Anyway,
mean, I
so
think most.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, any closing thoughts on this before we wrap it up for tonight?
Yeah, Cal, I'll give it over to you.
Well, since we're talking about just how we raise children, I think that there might be a perception among some people who want to push critical race theory that conservatives wouldn't want to talk about racism in American history. And
Mm,
I think to myself, would why would that be true? I mean, a part of the core conservative belief is that human beings are fallen, and
yeah, I think it's kind of breaking up a little bit
Oh,
for.
I think we're losing it.
Yeah, we're losing him. But no, it was a good thought. It's a good thought to end on. Is he's talking about how a lot of conservatives don't want to talk about race, and that there's some truth to that. It's painful, but it's true. Is that um, sometimes conservatives want to go on the other side of that spectrum of diversity and just say, well, race shouldn't matter to anybody at any time, ever. And that's sort of the Charlie
Mhm.
Candace Owens wing of conservatism, where if you care about your race, then you're stupid. Like you shouldn't care about it at all. It doesn't define who you are.
Mhm.
And if it does, keep that to yourself, right? And so
Yeah.
there is a reaction to that. So there's a middle ground to find. So
Yeah,
anyway,
and I think that also there is a challenge to it that if you're uncomfortable talking about it, like there is a challenge of to what degree are you is your life, you know, promoting reconciliation in some way. And I think that if you, I would challenge people, viewers, that if you're looking in your community, I would almost imagine there are community movements that are not trying to just breed more division, but are actually trying to reach out towards reconciliation in some way. It's here locally in Virginia,
mm,
and I would almost guarantee that it's there as well where you're at. It's just I think it's easier to help make sense of this as a group, with the aim towards reconciliation and not more division. But you're right, Wes. Like it can be uncomfortable to talk about, but I don't think that it's impossible. I don't think that it's something that people need to be afraid of. But it might require, your action. Not just to oppose critical race theory that's in your school and go to the school board and stuff, but to actually question, what to what degree am I also helping out like this project of listening, of bridging a divide, of acknowledging that there maybe are stories that aren't being told that need to be. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with telling those stories, but certainly in the context and in the intent, that's the main focus. And as long as it's towards the health of the nation and this progress, then I think that's well and good. But I would challenge people to look out there if you're uncomfortable.
absolutely. Well, thank you. That's a great place to end it. So we really appreciate Cal being on. That was some stuff he provided. That's all right. We'll figure out that connection. But
Oh, okay.
thank you, John, for all your thoughts on this. So let us know, for those that are watching, let us know your thoughts on critical race theory. Let us know how does it affect you in your life, or if you've got kids, like how do you expect? What is your plan to be able to educate them on this? We've got definitely people who are liberal, moderate, all sorts of things on our page. So I'm curious to get their thoughts, and maybe there's people who actually defend it and think it's a good idea. So I'm looking forward to having those kind of debates in the future. But in the meantime, thank you, John. Appreciate your time on the show. We've got another episode
Absolutely.
coming up next week. Can't wait to get into some more topics. So we'll see you guys then.
Sounds good, man. Cheers, man.
All right.